I wouldn't consider myself a highly active individual, but I do enjoy working out and running every so often, you know, to maintain a decent level of fitness. My friend Jay and I typically work out and run together, as Jay is always in good shape and tends to kind of coach me through it. Jay and I would often go for runs late at night in my neighborhood since it's mostly well lit, and I live in a fairly safe area. However, we stopped running in my neighborhood about 2 months ago after something happened. The layout of my neighborhood is that there's a main road that connects to two separate roads that branch off, but ultimately, they all loop back to the main road, which leads to a dirt path that stretches into local farms and larger properties. This setup is crucial for understanding the situation Jay and I found ourselves in one night. We decided to run from my house along a path that goes through the woods and leads to one of the roads that branches off from the main road in the neighborhood. The plan was to use that road to reconnect to the main road and then continue running down the dirt path before returning to my house on the main road. I know it sounds a bit complicated, but we took this unusual route to increase the distance, as our regular route, just running on the main road and back, had become too easy for us. The run began as it usually did, with Jay and me running from my house to the path, chatting about high school drama as we went along. However, not long into the run, we started hearing footsteps behind us. At first, we didn't think much of it, as the path was often used by other runners or people crossing from one part of the neighborhood to another. But as we kept running, the footsteps remained behind us, matching our pace. When we sped up and ran faster, the footsteps mirrored us. When we slowed to a jog or even walked for a moment, so did they. By this point, Jay and I were clearly starting to feel uneasy and a bit scared, but we were nearly at the well-lit road. When we finally exited the path and stepped onto the road, we looked back and saw no one trailing us. We both exchanged a confused glance, unsure of what had just happened, but we decided it was likely just another runner who was keeping a distance from us. We continued along the side road that led to the main road in my neighborhood, following the main road all the way to where it turned into the dirt path. At this point, we were both still feeling good, so we decided to push on, running further down the dirt path. However, unlike the main road, this path had no streetlights, and the trees lining it created an eerie atmosphere in the dark. Jay and I ran about a mile down the path before deciding to turn around and head back. As we turned, I caught a brief glimpse of a dark figure darting into the trees on the left side of the road. Immediately, the earlier footsteps came back to mind, and I began to feel much more uncomfortable. I told Jay that I had seen a figure move into the trees along the path we were about to take, but he brushed it off, saying I was probably just being paranoid and imagining things after all the distance we had run. I almost convinced myself to believe him, so we started heading back to my house. We ran past the spot where I had seen the figure without incident, but just as we were nearing the main road again, we heard rustling from the trees about 20 feet behind us. We turned around, and that's when we saw a figure standing in the middle of the road dirt path. The figure stood with its back to us, dressed in a black hoodie, tattered and filthy khaki pants, and black shoes. In that moment, I was gripped by a fear I had never experienced before. It felt like my heart might explode from my chest. It was beating so rapidly. Jay looked at me, then back at the figure, and asked, "What the hell are you doing?" But trailed off in the middle of his sentence as we both heard the person begin to laugh. It was an unsettling, horrible cackling, the kind that made your skin crawl. As we froze, the person turned to face us, still laughing, but then, abruptly, stopped. He simply stared at us with a glare that I'll never forget, his wide eyes and pale face etched into my memory. Jay and I exchanged one final, terrified glance before we bolted, running faster than we ever had in our lives, sprinting the entire 2 miles back to my house. As we ran, that terrible laugh echoed behind us, spurring us on to run even harder. When we finally reached my house, I couldn't hold it in anymore and threw up. We rushed inside through the back door, locking every possible entry and slamming the garage doors shut. We collapsed, panting, still trying to comprehend what had just occurred, and made a solemn promise to never run in my neighborhood at night again. If you're a night runner, always stick to well-lit areas and make sure to bring a friend to stay safe. As a high school junior, I ran cross country and track, and I loved running alone. I wasn't the fastest member of my team, but I had great endurance and could lose myself in the steady rhythm of my footsteps hitting the ground. A woman from a quiet rural neighborhood near a forest preserve hired me to help exercise her energetic puppy. Izzy had agreed to pay me $10 per run, which seemed like an easy way to make some extra money. Izzy needed the exercise, and I was getting paid while also training. The area I ran through was a mix of scattered homes, abandoned farms, a cemetery, and the remains of a former Colts commune. My parents had always cautioned me about running alone in such isolated places, but I figured I was fast enough to outrun any potential danger. That all changed one evening. It was just before dusk when I decided to take Izzy for a longer run. The setting sun painted the sky with a deep orange hue, casting long shadows across the road and making everything feel darker than it should have. The only sounds were my heavy breathing, Izzy's panting, and the rhythmic thumping of my shoes on the pavement. Occasionally, I'd hear a bird rustle in the trees or a dog barking in the distance, but for the most part it was unnervingly quiet. The farther I ran, the quieter it became, as though the world itself was slowly emptying of sound. About 2 miles into our run, we came to a section of the road surrounded by dense forest on both sides. That's when Izzy suddenly stopped. Her ears perked, and she stood completely still, staring into the woods. A low whimper escaped her throat. I followed her gaze and initially saw nothing, just the dense tree trunks swaying slightly in the breeze. But then, between two trees, a man's face slowly appeared, peering out from behind a trunk. He was short, perhaps in his 30s, wearing a hat pulled low over his face, a thick jacket despite the mild weather, and gloves. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. The stillness of his gaze unsettled me, but I tried to reassure myself, telling myself he was probably just a hiker or a hunter. Even so, there was something about the way he stood, half hidden among the trees, that made my instincts scream. Watching silently, the man sent an icy chill down my spine. His presence felt wrong, as though he wasn't just another person passing through, but something out of place, something that shouldn't have been there at all. I gave him a polite nod, trying to appear unaffected, and started jogging again. My heart was racing a little faster now, but not because of the run. A few steps later, Izzy stopped again, her body stiff, her tail tucked between her legs. My stomach sank as I turned back. The man had moved closer. He wasn't hiding behind the tree anymore. He was now standing right at the tree line, just a few feet from the road, still staring. His head was tilted slightly, as if he was studying me. A sickening realization began to creep in. He wanted me to know he had moved. He wanted me to notice. I felt something cold slide down my spine, and my body instinctively started to prepare for flight, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe he was just some weird guy trying to mess with me. Perhaps, if I ignored him, he'd get bored. I kept running, trying to maintain control, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. At first, I thought he was gone. The woods appeared empty again, but just as I turned my gaze forward, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. I spun around, and there he was, sprinting toward me, holding a butcher cleaver. A choked scream got stuck in my throat as pure, unfiltered terror exploded through my body. I didn't think. I just ran. Adrenaline shot through me like electricity, and I pushed myself harder than I ever had in any race. My breath came in ragged gasps. Izzy struggled to keep up, her leash jerking violently in my hand as we tore down the road. I had never known fear like this before, a primal fear that gripped my bones, telling me I would die if I slowed down. I glanced back again. Only once did he stop chasing me. His face was contorted in pure rage, his mouth slightly open as if growling. The gleam of the blade caught the final rays of sunlight. He wasn't merely running. He was running wildly, his arms flailing in unnatural movements, his legs moving almost too quickly, like something not accustomed to running at all. That's when I realized he wasn't breathing. I could hear my own frantic gasps. I could hear Izzy panting. I could even hear the distant rustling of trees, but not him. His footsteps thundered behind me, his pace matching mine, but there was no sound of breath, just that dreadful silence beneath the pounding of his boots. I reached a neighborhood and sprinted between houses, zigzagging through yards, hoping to lose him. My vision was blurring, my legs screamed in protest, but I couldn't stop. I darted behind a shed with Izzy. Finally, when I was sure we had put enough distance between us, I pressed myself against the rough wooden wall, gripping my knees and gasping for air. Silence. I swallowed hard, my heartbeat still hammering in my ears. Slowly, I turned my head. At the top of the hill, he stood, watching. The cleaver dangled from his hand, his chest rising and falling as if he had just stopped running too. But he wasn't chasing anymore. He was just standing there, staring. We locked eyes. His face was void of emotion now, no rage, just that blank, unsettling gaze, as if he had simply lost interest. A minute passed. Then another. A car's headlights appeared in the distance, beams cutting through the dark. And just like that, he turned and walked back into the woods. No hesitation. No hurry. He was just gone. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally did, I took the longest route back to the I snuck through the woman's yard, trying to stay hidden from view of the main road. My hand trembled as I took my payment, acting as though nothing had happened. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell my parents. I knew that if I did, they would never let me run alone again. I'm not sure who he was, whether he was part of the old cult, a drifter, or something else entirely, but there is one thing I do know. I never ran in that direction again. This story covers nearly 7 years, so I'll keep it as clear and concise as I can. I live in a suburban neighborhood surrounded by vast stretches of rural countryside. The area is nothing but open fields and winding country roads, making it nearly impossible to get anywhere without a car. It's a beautiful place, but it's also very isolated, which has made me feel more trapped here, especially during quarantine. The first time I saw something suspicious was when I was 9. My little brother, who was 7 at the time, and I were walking our dogs down towards the end of our street near the main road. We were casually talking and not paying much attention when we suddenly heard someone call to us. "Hey, come here." A big white SUV was parked at the start of our street, and a man was leaning out the window, waving for us to come over. I clearly remember that he was a tall white man with curly blonde hair. My little brother started to walk towards him, but I stopped him. I'm a very cautious person, and I'd heard all the horror stories about kids being lured into vans, never to be seen again. I quickly led us off in the other direction, back to our house. While keeping an eye on the guy in the car, I noticed that when he saw we were leaving, he turned his car around and drove off. When I got home, I told my mom about what happened, but she brushed it off, saying he was probably just going to ask us for directions or something similar. At the time, it scared me a little, but I didn't think much of it until later. A year passed, and in Halloween of 2014, another strange event occurred. A black sedan was reportedly following trick-or-treaters down the street. When a parent tried to approach it, the driver attempted to run them over before driving off, disappearing from sight. To make things worse, it appeared that the license plates had been removed. While I didn't witness this firsthand, some adults in the neighborhood made a big deal about it, and I was given yet another stern lecture on not talking to strangers. People were particularly sensitive to these things at the time, especially since the murder of Hannah Graham had recently occurred in the area. Fast forward another 4 years to summer break in 2018. Some neighbors of ours were away on vacation and asked if I could take care of their dog while they were gone. I needed to stop by their house 3 times a day, once in the morning around 8 a.m., once in the afternoon after lunch, and once again at 9 p.m. Their house is located on the right side of our neighborhood, just off the main road. To get there from my house, I could either take a right at the end of my street or cut through the woods into their backyard. Going through the woods was quicker, but the brush was thick, and the trees were close together, so I usually chose to walk along the street. One night, lost in a session of Call of Duty with my friends, I forgot to let the dog out. By the time I remembered, it was already past 10 p.m., so I rushed over, worried the dog might pee inside. It was pitch black outside, and all I could see was the beam of my flashlight and the stars overhead. Luckily, the dog had been able to hold it, so I let him out as usual. After he finished, I brought him back in and was getting ready to leave when I looked out the window and saw a black sedan parked next to the driveway. This made me uneasy because I was fairly sure the car hadn't been there when I first arrived, and there were no other houses nearby. I also knew for certain that the owners wouldn't be back for a few more days. After debating what to do for a few minutes, I finally decided to cut through the woods on my way back. I did so without any issues, and from then on, I took the woods as my safer route every time I went to pet sit for them. I never saw the black car again after that, but the events leading up to that point weren't enough to warrant a story. It's what happened more recently that truly terrifies me, making me wonder if these events could somehow be connected. I run for the track team at my school, and since quarantine had stopped us from having regular practices, I've been running every day around the roads near my house. My street isn't very long, so I often run off the main road onto other connecting roads. For the first few months, everything was going fine. I would jog for about an hour, enjoying the scenery and exploring different country lanes. However, about a month ago, something happened that made me uneasy. I was running back home on the main road when I noticed that a car seemed to be following me. I always run on the left side of the road, facing oncoming traffic. This way, if a car comes up behind me, especially on a blind curve or in areas with low visibility, I can see it coming and avoid getting hit. Coincidentally, a large white SUV was driving on the opposite side of the road, moving at about the same speed I was jogging. This struck me as odd because there aren't many cars on that road, and people usually drive much faster on busier streets. Unsure of its intentions, I decided to turn onto a small side street that led to a cul-de-sac. The car didn't follow, so I ran down to the end and then headed back home. The next day, the car followed me again. This time, I noticed it was parked at the start of a driveway, and it pulled out after me as soon as I passed. Just like the day before, it followed me for about a mile before I turned onto the same side street, where it then drove off. This strange pattern continued for 10 days straight. Every day, the same thing happened. It followed me. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but it kept happening day after day. I began to think that the car might be going somewhere on a schedule that just happened to align with my runs. To test this theory, I decided to run an hour later than usual. On the first day, I didn't see the car. But the next day, much to my unease, it was once again following right behind me. This certainly made me feel uneasy, but I hesitated to tell my parents. I was worried they would forbid me from running altogether. Moreover, nothing had happened yet, so I decided to tolerate it as long as I remained cautious and kept an eye on it. On the 11th day of being followed, I turned onto the side street and saw a black sedan parked at the end. At first, I thought nothing of it. There were a few houses on the street, and it likely belonged to someone who lived there. However, as I got closer, I noticed something strange. Beneath the car, barely visible, was the silhouette of a person. They were huddled on the far side, trying to stay out of sight. Immediately, a chill ran down my spine. I turned around and ran in the opposite direction, glancing over my shoulder to ensure they didn't move. To make things worse, I saw the white SUV that usually drove off, now parked at the top of the street, trapping me in. Panic began to set in, and I realized I preferred dealing with the familiar danger of the SUV rather than whatever unknown threat was behind the sedan. I picked up my pace, aiming to sprint past the SUV. Just as I was within a few feet of it, a man jumped out and started chasing me. Fortunately, I easily outran him. I was grateful that my months of training had paid off. When it became clear that he couldn't catch up, he yelled at me to come back and said he just wanted to talk. I responded with a dismissive gesture and sprinted the remaining mile back to my house. I finally broke down and told my mom, who immediately got me on the phone with the police. Unfortunately, since I wasn't able to get a license plate number, there wasn't much they could do. They assured me they would look into it, but from what I can tell, nothing has been done. These experiences have been weighing heavily on my mind over the past few weeks, and with all the extra time on my hands, I've had plenty of time to reflect on everything. After connecting the dots, it's become clear to me that these men have been trying for years to kidnap a child from our street. There are a lot of children in my neighborhood, which explains why they seem to frequent it so often. It scares me that someone less cautious than I am might find themselves in the same situation and fall victim to these predators. I still have nightmares about the man who chased me down the street. He was very tall, with blonde curls, the same man who tried to abduct me when I was 9 years old.